The symmetry tool holds some great surprises and can reveal enormous potential, especially when it comes to sculpting and modeling. We're going to work through a fairly simple example here with 2 cubes. I'm going to take a box, significantly reduce its height, and if necessary, I can adjust the number of segments and its density a bit. Next, we'll confirm the changes. And then I'll duplicate this shape to create a more complex form. Then, using the gizmo tool, I can, for example, set the angle to 45 degrees and rotate the copy accordingly, and then combine these 2 shapes. And rebuild the segments so that they can be joined together. There we go. So this will be our starting point. And the symmetry tool can be found here. You can enable or disable this symmetry tool, and it can be activated not only for elements like the stamp tool, for example, but you can also use it with sculpting tools such as move, inflate, brush, and so on. This means that the symmetry tool is available for a wide range of different tools, allowing you to achieve more precise and balanced results when working with various sculpting techniques. What's interesting is that you can also increase the number of radials, for example, on the y-axis. If we have a shape here with 8 points, we can use this as a base, and you'll have 8 reference points and 8 deformation points where the symmetry will take effect. So for example, if we select the Move tool, I can carefully position myself on specific reference areas, and I am also able to transform or change my shape as needed. And for example, give it a bit of depth here. And then further refine the volume this way. What's interesting is that up to a limit of 32 radials, you can increase this value. So for example, I'll set it to 16, which will give me even more ways to create much more pronounced deformations. And if necessary, by slightly changing the axis, for example, which will allow you to vary the transformation axis a bit. This doesn't apply only to this tool, because if we take, for example, the Bend tool, which is located right here, it too can be used for transformations, or at least for transformations using symmetry. And depending on the intensity and also the size of your brush, or more generally the shape you use for sculpting, you'll get more or less varied results that will allow you to carve into this shape with greater or lesser depth. We'll try not to deform it too much. So, depending on the pressure you apply with this tool, you'll see a result here that is actually quite interesting. And at that point, you'll be able to draw specific shapes through it using this sculpting tool. For another example, here we'll use the Inflate tool, which can work either in normal mode or, if needed, in subtract mode. Which saves you from having to individually select the elements you want to work on. You can see here that otherwise you would have had to go all the way around this shape, which is starting to look a bit like a flower, albeit only vaguely, but in any case you can see that all this sculpting work was made possible thanks to this symmetry function. Now what's interesting is that beyond this, you can also, let me maybe change the mode. Right now I think I'm in matcap mode, so I'll switch back to lit mode so I can continue working. The colorimetry through the paint tool found here, and possibly by adjusting your brush a bit, maybe by using dynamic capture here with an alpha like this one, for example. And in terms of fall off, you're free to choose a different model than this one. So the advantage is that you can of course apply a specific color. And as I'm doing, for example here, by using symmetry along the Y radials on the X plane, when I apply my color, you can see it will also be applied by simply using the number of radials I've specified here. So if you do this, using the layer function, for example, you'll be able to stack the layers on top of each other. And for instance, imagine creating a color gradient using layers, which will allow you to work on each one individually without necessarily destroying or overlapping the colors. And you'll be able to adjust the distribution of these colors, especially by changing the layer's opacity. So if we pick a slightly different color, I can, for example, emphasize the shadow areas simply by spreading these colors over all the areas I'm interested in. Since it's an independent layer, you just need to remove this layer to see if, for example, you want to delete it, or you can adjust the opacity of this layer here and the blending of these N colors that you can apply. If I take another example, we can, for instance, work on the stem and choose, for example, this color here and apply a color that will harmonize smoothly with the original yellow. Again, it's a layer, so here you can also adjust the opacity or even hide this color if needed.